Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Rhode Island College Wind Ensemble concert. Today we have with us Mr. Mike DeQuattro, who is a faculty member at Rhode Island College, has been for a number of years. And Mike wrote a piece for us that actually is a little set of pieces that we're quite excited about, and it was a really interesting project. But I'd like to introduce you to Mike and tell you a little bit about the project. So, Mike, first, tell us about your background growing up, your interest in music, college, other things, what you do now. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. It's funny. Growing up, um, my interests were essentially uh, uh, rock and roll and classic rock and metal. Actually, I was really into heavy metal. And in terms of, getting into more formal training, it didn't happen until my 20s. In terms of like the classical track. Um, in high school, I was at a vocational school. I learned culinary arts, and so I always had sort of a creative element in my life. I did take private lessons when I was young. I started at 8, and sort of as a deterrent away from my brother's guitar, my parents suggested I learn how to play drums, and so that's what I did. And I studied basically how to read between 8 and 12, and then between 12 and say 18 I just played in rock bands. And then I decided to go back to school, and long story short, um, I spent a few years at the Community College of Rhode Island, and I got an associate's in jazz and a general studies degree, which was great because it transferred over to Rhode Island College, where I studied with George Gonaconto and got on the classical track there. And once, you know, uh, I got to my junior year, I started wondering what I should be doing. And I was encouraged to continue with my studies. I ended up auditioning at the Boston Conservatory, and I spent a few years getting my master's degree there. I studied with Tim Jennis and Pat Hollenbeck. You know these guys. Uh,
Sure.
Jamie Haddad, possibly. You might know Jamie. He's at Berkeley. He was at Berkeley, but that's where I learned how to play hand drums. You see my hand drums behind me, and and Nancy Zeltzman, who's a phenomenal marimba player, and Ed Sandin. I took a little bit of some lessons with Ed, who's a phenomenal vibraphonist, and I can't touch these people. It was just part of my education. So that's sort of it in a nutshell.
Great, great. So
Mm.
you've been teaching at Rhode Island College for a number of years now. How long have you been teaching with us?
Yeah, Rick, I started. Sorry, I think I'm catching a little feedback. Uh, at at Rick, I started in. It's a little fuzzy because I also uh, accompanied for the dance department, and I can't remember which one came first. I believe I started accompanying at through the dance department in 1999, and then I auditioned for the percussion instructor's position when George retired, and I think that was in 2000. So I've been at Rick since 2000 in as a private instructor, and then I picked up a few courses as well. So I'm teaching like electronic music now and hand drumming, and I did percussion ensemble in the past, and a few other things that playing with you guys, picking up the concerts here and there. So yeah, it's a little fuzzy, but I believe I started in '99 in the dance department.
Excellent. So that's interesting. I want you to talk a little bit about like other stuff you do. So like people may not think of it as a composer and as a percussionist. You say, oh, you play for dancers, but
Yeah.
that's one of the things that you do. What else is in your sort of in your quiver of things that you do?
Well, I seem to bounce in and out of different things. I work with dancers quite a bit. It seems to be a very creative avenue that I've fallen into, and that started actually at the Boston Conservatory, and I really fell in love with it. There's something about that, mm, working across the sort of performance. boundaries, right? So I work directly with dancers. I communicate directly with dancers. They don't always communicate the language of music the same way that, other musicians would, but that's the fun with that kind of thing. It's kind of like maybe going into a recording studio and talking to an engineer. Well, they're looking at music from an engineer's point of view and what they hear, not necessarily all the specific notation that we might be dealing with. And they make amazing suggestions because it's a craft, it's an art, it's a science, it's everything kind of rolled up into one. So that's the joy of working sort of, I don't know if I'd call it interdisciplinary, but it's certainly collaborative. So I've had that opportunity to start over at the conservatory and then move over to Rhode Island College in that position and at Roger Williams. And through the universities and other organizations, I've been able to work with amazing uh, choreographers and dancers throughout the world. And I've had the opportunity to perform in New York. I have just recently got off a project where I composed for a film that's going to have a life in London, in the UK, respectively, really. And so working with dancers actually was a way to get into composition. That was really the gateway in. You accompany, you're making music on the spot. It's improvisational, it's impulsive, it's reactive, and it's also idea generating. So there's something very comfortable for me to work in that type of environment. And I love working with individuals that are as excited about invention and creativity as I am. And dancers always seem to be in that place, willing to try something and to create on the spot. This is really fun. So I don't know if I went off the rails a little bit, but
No, that's great. And when we'll talk a little bit now about this project, which everybody's about to watch. So when I started thinking about this, we've all been challenged during the pandemic to do different things that are out of our wheelhouse. So you've seen we've done lots of videos and recordings where we've put things together, everybody recording their part, and I wanted to try to present something that was going to be a little bit out of everybody's comfort zone, something that was a little bit different, um, and also teach students a little bit about the recording technology and some different things and some different types of music that they may not be familiar with or comfortable with. So when I'm thinking about all this in my head, I'm like, okay, who's going to be willing to take this on? In other words, who's creative enough and crazy enough to do this? And I thought, Mike, you're the guy.
well,
So we started having these conversations back, in the winter during the break. And so this is great, and this is kind of what we came up with this process. We're learning a little bit about recording techniques and also about improvisation. So from there, we had this conversation. But you want to tell them a little bit about the project that everybody's about to watch?
yeah. Okay. So when you approached me with the idea, of course, there was a lot of challenges in to overcome the idea of getting used to recording, the idea of using improvisation, the potential to interact with one another as close to real time as possible through the internet, and using all of these resources to pull something together that would make sense. And as we have, you know, talked about, the challenge is welcome. The end result was not predictable. And that's where the element of willingness and craziness comes in, right? And a little bit of experience saying, okay, I don't know what it's going to look like at the end, but I know that there'll be a product and I think it will be good and they will have learned something, and we're just going to trust the process. And that's what I'm used to. I'm used to jumping in without having a compass and finding my way. This is a comfortable place for me. And but I also understand that it's not a comfortable place for others. So, um, you and I talked about possibly using imagery as a way to inspire ideas with the students and get them to be inventive on their instruments, and also keep it reasonable. So, okay, I'm going to try to condense this down. So if we took like a snapshot of the few weeks that we worked together, we started in a large group. And in this large group, we drew on techniques from Butch Morris, who's well known for his improvisations and his hand gestures, and just body gestures, or even taking a piece of paper and crumpling it and throwing it, and having people say, having them respond to the sound of a crumpling paper. And improvisations come from this type of thing, and works come from this type of thing. Okay, so we worked in a large group and environment in that, and it's very hard to control because you're distant, and the internet does put that space between one another. Okay, I knew that the group situation wasn't going to work, but it was sort of like a warming up to the idea of, hey, we're going to play together. We're not going to listen to a recording, record our parts, and have somebody edit it together. This is going to be response. We're going to respond to one another, and we're going to use impulse, and we're going to work with the delay. And just as a sidebar, there is a way to overcome that delay, but it's too complicated to have so many people learn this in such a short amount of time. So that little piece really became the creative germ to move this piece along, was working with the delay to create ideas and a mood or texture. So kind of fast forwarding, we would go into breakout rooms and we'd divide them up into smaller groups, whether it was a few woodwinds here, a percussionist here, a little mixed group here. And I would give them little assignments to watch a little video and respond to the video. And people would, uh, this somebody that would be watching and responding to a video, the other students would be listening to that and responding to the person that's following the video. That's a terrible explanation, but suffice it to say that it is impulsive and reactive. And timing didn't really matter because I was more interested in the energy that it would create, the ideas that it would create, the dynamic that it would create, and the mood that it would create. And then when they would send the ideas to me, sometimes these sessions would stay in place, and I might manipulate a few things by taking a piece here, a piece there, and joining them together to enhance what was already there. So the project ultimately became a combination of improvisations that were captured on the spot and improvisations within those sessions that were pieced together to fill out the spaces or to create a more powerful representation of what was happening in that room. Now, that was a long explanation and maybe confusing, but that's it in a nutshell right there.
Well, I think the thing that was interesting about it from an educational standpoint is, from the time we're little, you said 8 to 12, you learn how to read music, and basically as musicians, in a lot of ways, we're trained to follow orders. Do this, and it's very defined what we're asked to do. And as classical musicians, we're not always asked, well, what do you think? How would you respond to this? So that was one of the things that we threw in. We did, in a way, throw the ensemble into the woods without the compass.
That's right.
And let's say everybody's going to be safe at the end of this, but let's see what comes out on our journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did here. So that's the piece we're about to hear. How many segments are we hearing?
That's a good question. I think there's maybe seven, 7 or 8. I can't really remember, but they're short. I don't think any one of them lasts much more than 4 minutes. The entirety of the piece, I think, is about 11 minutes long. So it's palatable and I think entertaining. And there is a video component that goes with it that I hope will enhance the mood of the music.
Yeah. Well, I think this was a wonderful project. I know the students were sort of wondering, what the heck are we doing here? But I think ultimately, when we look back on this, it's like, wow, that was a really cool experience. And I'm certainly glad that we did it. So, Mike, thanks so much for writing this piece for us, for putting this all together and working with the students. And we hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Joe. I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed working with the students, and I can't thank you enough for giving me the opportunity. So very cool.
Thank you. Everybody, enjoy the show.